Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
It's a software object that is tightly connected, paired to its physical counterpart, and it acts as a proxy or as a bridge to the digital world. So what's inside is all the data about the structure, so how is it built, number of parts, what was the blueprint, what is the bill of material, all those kind of things. Then the context in which it operates. And finally, you have the behavior.
The digital twin, or software-defined product as I prefer to call it, is the most important tech in IoT. Yet you hardly hear anything about it, especially when compared to other IoT tech such as sensing, networking, and analytics. Maybe it's because it's such a new and abstract concept for most people. Well, that's about to change. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with Dimitri Volkmann about producing the digital twin for the industrial Internet of Things.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation Internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is for business leaders and managers employing the Internet of Things for their business or the business of their customers. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair, and I interview the industry's leading authorities to find out how they use IoT to improve business and create value. If you like this show, subscribe to it on iTunes and go to iotinc.com to check out my complimentary articles, videos, meetups, and webinars. This is the first in a series of 4 or maybe 5 episodes that will focus exclusively on the software-defined product or digital twin, because it's that important. In fact, it's the most important tech in IoT. At the end of this series, I'm hoping you'll have a clear understanding of what it is and how it can be used in your IoT implementation. If you want to learn more about the SDP, my book, IoT Inc., How Your Company Can Use the Internet of Things to Win in the Outcome Economy, dedicates a full chapter to it. But not only that, it repeatedly refers to it throughout the book. It will also be heavily covered in my upcoming online courses, playing a leading role in the business course, the strategy course, and the technology course. With that, let's get on with the show. Oh, a quick note. Something went wacky with the interview recording software, so it kind of had to be patched together in post. Other than my voice sounding kind of weird and the timing being off, well, slightly off in some places, you're really going to enjoy the show. With me today on the IoT show is Dimitri Volkmann. Dimitri is a software executive with a history in IT platforms and expertise in bringing together product management and product marketing in order to deliver products to the market successfully. At GE Digital, Dimitri is leading digital twin thought leadership and product marketing on the Predix platform. Dimitri, welcome.
Welcome, Bruce. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So how would you compare an IT platform with an IoT platform?
Well, that's a vast subject. So I think the way I think about it, and this is actually what drove me to IoT initially, because as you said, I had a long career in platforms, starting in databases, going client server, internet, everything, and so on. And at some point, I realized that what we've been doing in the past 5 decades was we made things disappear. We virtualized the world. No more purchase orders, no more music, as LPs, or no more, 70 millimeter film. Everything was becoming digital, but was making things disappear. When I look at the physical world, you're not going to make the system disappear. So it's really about creating a digital representation connected to that physical system so you can bridge it or integrate it into the digital world. So I realized that was a very different type of technology that we needed for that. And so that's the fundamental difference. So the IoT platforms have to deal with creating, a sort of proxy to the physical world and maintaining that connection. That's fundamentally what is different.
So you're saying in the IT world, you're working in the digital, and then in the IoT world, you need to have that proxy so you can work within kind of the same mechanisms as IT. Is that right?
Yeah, and because the anchor is in the physical world, so the machine is still there, but you need to have this access to the machine through a proxy, and it actually go both ways. This is where the origin of IoT in terms of sensors and actuators comes. So sensors give you information, but you can also send commands to those machines.
That's right. You can actuate the physical world, kind of like a transfer of energy, right? You're kind of some world energy into a digital, or you're transforming the digital into some world energy. Well, why don't we start with a little bit about you and your background in IoT? Just bring us up to date.
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned earlier, about probably 4, 5, 6 years ago, I realized that there was this big change coming because we were going after the physical world. We had pretty much optimized, whatever you can do in terms of what we call systems of records or systems of engagement. And I thought, well, yeah, there is something interesting there. Now, my second level of thinking was because if you look at IoT today, you have consumer and you have industrial. And when I looked at consumers, I figured out, well, it's probably be an extension of capturing data about users and maybe automating their homes. But if I look at industrials, there are pockets of productivities, there are optimization of the systems itself and on the operation that have a much broader opportunity in terms of digitalization. Because to be perfectly honest, there's a lot of things that can be done in the industrial world from a digital standpoint, because this world has been disconnected from the internet for many times, and it's now suddenly embracing internet.
Yeah, so it sounds like then it's been around 4 years then that you've been, has it been at GE that you've been for the 4 years in IoT, or did you start elsewhere?
No, I started as a consultant when I came out of the mobile world. The mobile technology has been a bridge for me, because you can argue that mobile things, a little bit of that. So I did a bit of consulting initially on that, a few startups in the medical space, and I joined GE about 1.5 years ago now.
Now, we're going to talk obviously today about the digital twin or the software-defined product. Had you heard about this concept before joining GE?
I have to be honest, no. But I actually fairly quickly got into the digital twin at GE, and actually it might be interesting to mention that I said earlier what we've done initially is go after basically records, and we digitalize them. And there is some literature on the market that explain where we build systems of record, and the key technology for that was the relational database. Then when the internet came in, we started to connect people to those systems, and we started to build what we call system of engagement. And the key technologies at that time were search, messaging, those kind of things. Now, if you look at the world of physical thing, there isn't yet a concept of systems of asset. And I think it's emerging now, and the key technology in the systems of asset is going to be the digital twin. So that's the evolution of the progression, if you want.
No, that's interesting. Well, why don't that's interesting. So starting first with strictly, just information, strictly, so records, that is holding information, then bringing people and folding them into information technology. And then we're now saying we do the same thing with physical assets, right? I mean, into information technology. I mean, IoT and IT, they are both, if you think about it, all incremental value of an IoT product comes from transforming data into useful information. So IoT really is an information technology, but like you say, the difference between them now is going from people and records to assets, or would you go a little bit further than that?
I think it's quite right. The other angle you have to think about is that when we said physical, actually, we basically said, at a very high level, something that has a structure, operating into a context, and as a behavior. So it can be applied to machine, but interestingly enough, it can be applied to human being as well. So what is different is actually the dynamic aspect. If you think about a financial transaction, it lasts a millisecond, then you store it somewhere, and you actually don't want it to change at all for compliance reasons and those kind of things. If you think about a physical system, it's going to continue to generate data. Now you want to accumulate those data and also not change them, but there is this dynamic pairing aspect of something that behaves and lives that is very different from what we've been doing earlier in the digitalization years, if you want.
No, and I think that's absolutely correct. And when people, kind of ask me, what's the difference between a model a typical model, and we've had models, in pretty much all different fields. And then an IoT model is, I think, I do point to that, is that in an IoT model, like you said, it's alive, and so it's constantly being updated, both just becoming more accurate and then constantly being used. And so that is would you say that's a good way of kind of differentiating the two types of models?
Yes, I would agree with it. I would totally agree with that, and I think we'll talk about that later on. But we see that, and I want maybe say that up front. The digital twin is still a term and a concept which is in flux in terms of definition. So people tend to sometimes associate it to a model, but it's not just a model. It's really the accumulation of all the data and the intelligence you can build on top of that. And the reason I'm saying that, it's very important to understand that there's a life cycle aspect. So when you look at physical system and industrial system, you start with an idea. Oh, I'm going to build a better machine for that. Then you design it. Then you build it. Then you start running it and operating it. You service it for a certain amount of time, and finally you decommission it. So all along that cycle, you accumulate data and you can do predictions and you run it. But at the end of that cycle, actually there is residual value of all this data and intelligence because you've accumulated all that. And when we talk about platform, we'll see that it's very important because you can use all that historical data of those systems to do simulation to create the next generation. So there is this overall holistic aspect of aggregating data and intelligence all across the life of a system, which is a fairly new concept.
Yeah, and I want to get into simulation, but let's just start with the basics. In your view, then, what is a digital twin?
So I think there are four major components to think about. First of all, it's an enablement technology. So you have to understand that. And there are different terms. You can think about it. You're a software model with data, as I said, or a software construct or a software object. But it's really important is what I said in the beginning of the discussion. So it's a software object that is tightly connected, paired to its physical counterpart, and it acts as a proxy or as a bridge to the digital world. So that's I would say, level one, high level thing. Now, what's inside? So what's inside is all the data about the structure. So, how is it built, number of parts, what was the blueprint, what is the bill of material, all those kind of things. Then the context in which it operates. And context is very broad here. It's obviously, temperature, pressure, location, but it's also is a financial model. Has there been some service records about that? Has there some specific expectation? And finally, you have the behavior. So is it running? What's the current, performance indication? Can I send comments to it? So that's the data aspect. And then you build intelligence on top of this data, specifically analytics, predictions, early warning. So that's the element. Now, at the end of the day, what do you get from that? Well, whenever you need anything about the past and present performance of that system, you go to the digital twin. And when you want to have predictions, or early warnings, you go to the digital twin. So you can very well imagine a sort of dialogue using this software construct, and this is why it can be used in different type of interface, whether it's UI, VR, or voice. And you would go to a digital twin and say, "Oh, when were you created? What is your blueprint? When will you start the first time? What are your most critical components? When was this component service? When is it likely to have a failure in the coming 2 weeks or 6 weeks?" All those kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I think you could even look in the present, right? Like,
of course,
what's going on now? Are we within tolerances and so forth? I have to tell you, my personal opinion is I do not like the term digital twin, mostly because it kind of, to me, it connotes a physical representation. And like you said, it can be more than just a physical representation. It could be a biological representation, a chemical one, a financial one, an economic one. And so I like software-defined product, and I think you kind of said that, and it consists of a model and then the application that goes around it. How would that fit in your thinking? Does that kind of fit in the right way?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and believe it or not, amongst the few people that think about digital twin years ago, and it's actually now increasing significantly. There are a lot of debate and discussions. I do agree that the twin is, because the problem with twins is if you separate them at birth, they go in different directions, and you really don't want to do that. So some analysts like Gardner have been using the concept of digital entities, but the thing is that there is market momentum about digital twin right now.
Exactly.
So, I'll give you an anecdote here. When I started looking at digital twins in the beginning of 2016, I set up a Google alert on digital twin, and I was getting like, one hit or two hits, I would say every other week. Nowadays, I'm getting one every day.
So it's definitely, and I'm kind of the same way, because twin to me is a matching, and I know it doesn't just have to be physical, but generally, it's a matching. But I like to think of it as a simulation, right? I mean, that's maybe a better, for people listening right now, like, what's the digital twin? I mean, you gave a really good description of it at a high level, and then what's inside of it. But really, what we're talking about is a simulation, aren't we?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, because it's, in an ideal world, when platform matures and when the technology is there, it will be the exact, again, the proxy to the physical system. You can imagine a state where, if you want to have information about a running system, you go to the twin or you go look at it yourself, you're going to have exactly the same information.
To the fidelity of the data,
so right? Simulation is, exactly, fidelity of the data. So, and especially in the industrial world, usually the way we talk about simulation is when we actually look at, I'm designing the next generation of this system, and I want to simulate it before I actually build it. Because again, think about it in terms of the cycle, the digital twin cycle before the physical system exists. So you start, modeling that system. And this is actually the origin of if you look at the origin of the digital twin, it was created for that purpose. So before I build the physical system, I create a digital model, and I have existing data about past performance, and I run this data through those models to figure out it's going to work. So you have to keep that concept in mind. So when you refer to simulation in the context of digital twin in industrial, a lot of people will think, it's when you're doing CAD models. I want to make sure that before I build it's going to work.
I'm thinking more in a general term. But let's talk about the underlying technology a little bit here, because I like to understand the digital twin with respect to GE. What is the mathematical foundations below it? What type of math is it?
So again, there are two things there, and what is interesting to answer this question more properly is, again, if you go back to the cycle of design, build, service, operate, and service. Initially, we started to do digital twins for the design and build, obviously, but this is something that is much more internal, because this is our factory, so we don't necessarily communicate about that. So you will see other vendors in the market talking much more about this aspect, but we've doing it for many years. For what we are known as GE is much more on the operate and service, because you probably know very well, but GE to some extent stopped selling engines years and years ago. We don't sell engines anymore. We sell propulsion services. So we sell the engine, we do the maintenance on it. So now, in order to do that, we started to instrument our systems, our machine, and we build a lot of algorithmics and a lot of analytics, and actually physics is one very important thing in the digital twin for physical systems. So it's a combination. Again, it's a bundle of data about the structure, how many parts are they organized, the context in which it operates, then the readings you can have, and then you apply sophisticated analytics and machine learning on top of that.
And I guess fundamental to this is statistics, right? I mean, what we're doing is we're bringing in data points. We're trying to make a more and more accurate model. So talk to us a little bit about how statistics play into this.
Well, it's a fundamental element, and it's actually pretty tied to the platform, because the idea is that you start with what we call, there are different terms for that, but some people say the digital twin class, some others the idea of a digital twin prototype or digital twin blueprint. What it is that it's this idea of it's the model before it's built. Then when you have a new system build, you have an instance. Now, when you have many different instances of a same asset, well, you can start learning from all of that. So you have the statistics not only at the level of one system itself that you've observed for many years, but many of these systems. And this is where the concept of a platform becomes important, because the platform becomes a learning system. So you capture not the data about that specific engine where you can do statistics, but the data about all the different engines, and you can do statistics across the fleet if you want. So that's a very important element of the value of the platform, because you can't do that with individual digital twin running on different, software stacks. You have to centralize all that data in order to build more intelligence.
And that's a good point, is effectively looking at it from a micro or a macro point of view. You could simulate, let's use simulate for lack of a better word, a particular part, how a part is working. Then you could do the same thing for the product. But what we're talking about here is for the system of multiple products. And that's where the digital twin concept kind of separates a little bit, and I don't know if there's yet a word for this, and maybe you can fill in the blanks, but then when we're talking about bringing together multiple digital twins, that's what you're talking about on the platform level. And what's the concept behind that? Is there something analogous to digital twin for the system and like the entire environment?
Well, there's debates about that, and I think that I have a slightly different position, because to some extent, I think and if I go back to what we've done in information technology in the past, decades, we've gone very good at doing workflow optimization, at orchestrating things in order to optimize them. So you could say, oh, why can't we just do that very easily for IoT? Well, the problem is we do not have that reliable, high fidelity access to, again, the state, the current state, the future states, and the potential future states. So the idea is that the digital twin really becomes that object that gives you all the information, past, present, and predictions, so that you can orchestrate them and optimize workflows. But I would say that this optimization of workflows, they are no different from optimizing a business process, in a company. So I kind of separate the two. This is why I said, the essence of the twin is to give you the proxy to the physical system, and then as you have proxies of all those physical things, you can then apply classic, workflow optimization models to make them work better.
Where is that happening in the IoT world? Is that in the platform, and is it called something in particular?
Well, some people actually call it digital twin of processes. I personally do not like that, because I would say, well, these are models. Yeah. So it's model. The thing is, and that's true across the board. If you look at other domains, especially with data science and machine learning catching up, or growing very fast nowadays, there's a lot of sort of model-based development. So you apply a model to optimize things. And again, the key thing in IoT is, how do I get the reliable, high fidelity data so that I can optimize properly? And that's what the twins give you.
Well, let's shift away from the what into the how. So how are digital twins used in IoT today?
Yeah. So just to preface, I'm going to give you a couple of examples here, but because when I engage in conversation about digital twins, especially talk about models and simulation, you get a lot of people, and especially the business guy, tells you, right, modeling for the sake of modeling. Yeah, by the time I'm done modeling, my business is out. So the idea with the twin is we actually look at the outcome we are trying to achieve. So we design the twin by looking at the outcome. And usually the outcomes are defined by looking at the most critical parts or the most critical failure modes. So let me give you a couple of examples. One example, which is actually public on one of the GE engines, the G90, is that if you look at the jet engine, there are very critical parts, which are the blades, and especially the blades that are in the turbine. So the turbine is after the combustion chamber. So those blades, as you can imagine, they are operating in conditions where it's thousands of degrees in temperature. So what we do on those blades is we put what we call a thermal coating. So it's a sort of a special paint to make the blades much more resistant. Now, as we operate engines and maintain them, we realize that the engines that fly in the Middle East, where the air is hot and sandy, compared to the ones that operate in the Pacific North, have totally different failure modes, because the blades wear totally differently. So the first thing we do is, because we have digital twins of all those blades and we know where those engines operate, we can optimize, we can know when we have to maintain the different engines. So we look at each different engines and we say, well, this one's going to be maintained in 1 month because it's flying there, and this one can wait another 6 months because it's flying there. So that's the level one at the level of the assets. Now, once you have this information, you can start optimizing your operation. So you can start saying, oh, you know what? Actually, I don't have a shop where I can service that engine in the Middle East. So I'm going to reroute that plane. So it's going to fly 3 months in the North Pacific because it's going to wear slower. So you can start doing those kind of optimization at your operation level, again, because you have the information at the asset level that comes from the digital twin. And we're talking tens of millions of dollars of saving per year for an airline in these kind of scenarios.
So you're saying, in this particular example, it's using the digital twin for a operational optimization, right?
Yeah, initially asset optimization, and once you can optimize the asset, obviously you can optimize the operation. Okay. And we see most of our customers going into that. There's another interesting example that I want to give you, which is in the power generation, electricity generation. And we don't have that in production yet, but it's coming now. We have started to have models so that we can really predict when we need to do the maintenance for those big power generation turbines that we have, and those assets are very valuable. So when you turn them off, you lose a lot of money. So, for example, we had an example in the South California, where you obviously know that the demand for electricity is very strong during the summer. So through a prediction system, we realized that that specific turbine is likely to fail in July. So, and the maintenance was scheduled for October. So we're going to move the maintenance in May. So no big deal. You would say, well, classic optimization. Now, here's the problem. When you shut down such a machine, you don't just change the problematic part. You do a whole lot of set of changes and replacing of fluids and all those kind of things. So the customer will say, well, you're anticipating the maintenance from October to May, which means you're going to change a whole lot of parts that are not at the end of their life. So it's the cost element because you do the maintenance earlier. Now, because we have models of the other parts, we can tell that customers, well, you know what? Between now and May, you can actually beat up your machine. You can go out of spec because we know we can accept more wearing on these other parts. So again, it's that optimization between the different, lifing model. Lifing is one, we call that lifing. So prediction on the life of a model is one of the most, effective way to optimize and save money. There's obviously the failure mode because you don't want things to break, but being able to understand when you're reaching the end of life is what has the biggest economic impact.
So now are you moving now from efficiency to maintenance and then looking at, this end of or failure mode, trying to prevent that failure mode with, let's say, a predictive maintenance type application?
Yeah, it actually usually goes the other way around. The first thing, the progression is the following from our customers. The first things they usually do is what we call equipment health. So you look at, how is it running? Is it within specification? Is everything fine? Then you look at failure modes, which goes you into maintenance optimization. And now that you do maintenance optimization, you have a much better hand on when you need to stop your machines. And then you can go into operation optimization. And the end goal is always the same. The sort of the graal, if you want, in industry is no unplanned downtime. Because when you have something that breaks when you don't want it, that's the worst case scenario. So the no unplanned downtime is sort of the what we are all looking at, in delivering.
Okay, so equipment health, failure mode, and you were implying there was a third, but then you go to a third one, or is that the order there?
Yeah, well, equipment health, failure modes, maintenance, and operation optimization.
Operational optimization is what you're saying is the last one.
And by the way, the next step, and I don't think we're there yet in most of industries, but the next step is, well, you got to have ability to create new business model, because now that you have, I would say, the full visibility of, again, past and present condition of your system and the predictions of what might happen, you can start inventing, new ideas. You can start maybe monetizing that because you have a lot of data about how a certain type of equipment function. So you can put that on the market and sell it to other people that are trying to do similar things like that. So we haven't seen that phase of, reorganization of the industry, I would say. with maybe the exception of the automotive industry, because the automobile industry with Tesla going electric has really transformed the industry. But I believe personally that we're going to see that in the future in other industries, because when you know exactly when a power generation come from different sources, let's say solar, wind, or burning gas, you can go on the marketplace and say, you know what, in 4 hours I need more power. Who can give me that?
No, yeah, and I think what you're talking about is, extending the instrumentation or the sensing beyond just the physical assets, because once you can start sensing parameters that are important to your customer's business, that is when you can start doing this business model innovation. And yeah, it's just really, there's not just a limit to sensing for the product or the asset or the operations, right? I mean, we have our products out there in the world. We can sense other things too.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think this is where, again, the platforms are important, because this ability to provide those services about what you do on a digital platform and being able to selectively open that to different partners to create new models is going to be very important. We went through that in the e-commerce world. We started with monolithic websites, and now, most, e-commerce website allows you to create your own boutique or to type into different services or recompose them. So the same thing is going to happen in the industrial world. It's just early.
Well, let's start moving into that platform, but maybe just before we get there, or maybe this is going to get us there, let's talk about how the digital twin is developed. So how is it developed, and then how is it integrated into the end product?
So there are different personas, if you want. The first, I would say, the persona is the experts of these assets, because only the people that build those systems can actually understand it and find out what are the real important outcome, and basically created what we call that digital twin class, if you want, or blueprints. Yeah. Usually we look at the outcomes and based on the expertise that you have of the asset. So you have to be the asset expert. Now, what is very important is that, and that's sort of, this is changing in the market now, but initially the digital twin was sort of an end-to-end. So you will take the experts, you look at the assets, you will program all those rules, you will put that into an application, then you will start building the application, and you will have an application for maintenance, but your digital twin will be prisoner of that application if you want. So it will be designed for one specific purpose. So what most platforms are trying to do right now is to disconnect the two. So on one side, the experts do this hard job of bundling data intelligence, and then that digital twin runs on the platform, has API, and any developer can go talk to it and say, okay, what are you? What can you tell me about your past? What can you tell me about your present? What can you tell me about your future? And then create their own apps. Yeah. So there's this sort of development paradigm is shifting a little bit right now.
I like using the analogy of, and you tell me if this rings true for you, but I like when explaining this using the analogy of let's say a video game and then a player. So let's say we have a basketball game that we're playing. The intelligence that you were talking about, or that to embody with the program rules or this asset expert, they would provide a player with, how he jumps, maybe let's say it's a basketball game, how he jumps, his accuracy, and that would be encapsulated within the player. And then the application is kind of the game. So then it has, different players are there. There's maybe different conditions in the environment. And so that's, again, kind of this model and application wrapped around it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, it's a very good way to think about it. I totally agree. It's a very good way to think about it. And by the way, the interesting point you're making here is that, people might not necessarily realize, but there are digital twins of players in gaming system. We just don't call them that way, but these are digital twins.
Yeah, they're simulate. I mean, you effectively, again, and I think the important point that you're bringing here is encapsulating the characteristics of the player or the part into that model, and then you wrap it with and then you can put that model into different applications, right? And this can be the different applications. If you can reuse that same model, the player, the turbine, and put it into different environments, the application, then you've got a lot more power. And this is that separation, I think, that you're talking about, isn't it?
Exactly, that's exactly that separation, and the way you have to do it today, there's enough examples of the success of that. Is that you have to do it in a way that is API driven, so you can trigger an ecosystem. So that's no different from what we've been doing in the IT systems. So it's a very important concept, and it's actually it's interesting because if you look at the industrial world, which is used to doing end-to-end solution, it's actually a slow move because the temptation to build those models and to hide them into your app because it's your system and your app is still very high. And to be very honest, I think there's still a lot of debates about that in the whole industry. And I don't think we've reached the level of maturity yet where it's crystal clear for everybody. But I think this is something you're going to see evolved in the coming probably years. And I personally predict that you're going to see some vendors that don't get it. They're going to start to keep on being proprietary, and some that do get it and really trigger an ecosystem. And this one will survive. I think the other one will die.
No, I agree with you, Dimitri. And I think for everyone listening, this is an important point. And my view is really just a business one. When you develop these models, this is going to be intellectual property for your company. And if you do, let's say that you want to move platform, or let's say the platform vendor goes out of business or changes their mind, you need to maintain that intellectual property independent of the platform, right, Dimitri? And so this is just I think just in general, a good practice to do this separation, as you were saying. And it's not like it's new, right? I mean, this concept of software compartmentalization is something that we can apply to this new area of IoT platforms and the models that are running on them. But it's just a best practice, just in general, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I totally agree with that. And I think you're touching, I don't want to digress too much, but you're touching on a very interesting point, I believe, which is, midterm and long term going to be a great opportunity. Because if you think about it, that concept of, the value of the data as the raw data capture and the value of the data transformed through the algorithm, this is what's going to become the intellectual property. And you can very well imagine platforms that will give you the ability to manage that. The classic example which is actually inspired from a panel that I observed, where you have somebody from GE with somebody from an airline and saying, it's my engine, it's my data. And the airline will say, your engine is on my plane, so it's my data. And then you have the service company, because most airlines subcontract their servicing to a company, say, hang on a second, I have a contract with you, I'm responsible, it's my data. And then shows the leasing company, which says, you know what, guys, I'm providing the capital to buy those airplanes. So, yeah, exactly. And it's not over, because you have the insurance guy that said, you know what? If there's a liability problem, I'm the one paying. So, and the point is not, my point is that there is no clear yes or no who owns the data answer. So, because it can be spread around and shared between the different vendors. So there's going to be a need for platform to manage who has access and who can remonetize and resell the value of those data and the data transform on top of that. So it's a very interesting long-term view from a business standpoint.
And I agree. And I think, it is from a long-term point of view, and it's also a risk management issue in the short term. Well, short, mid, depends, right? You don't know when. But I think just what we're saying, and we're both nodding our heads here, is that this separation of model and then the application that it's within, or this separation of this knowledge and the environment that it's in, is super important. And I think it's something that you need to look at when choosing a platform to make sure that these things aren't conflated, they're not mixed up. And this is something I'm trying to do in this series right now, is just to understand, the digital twin, but more importantly, how do you develop it, and how is it related to the platform? Because you don't want it all mixed up. And I think we've kind of accidentally just sort of tripped over this, but it is one of the main points I think that's super important to make here.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's going to be difficult in the beginning because, if you take the analogy of, relational databases, when we started with relational databases, you had different type of SQL, and you were pretty much tied into the platform you were choosing. And this is going to happen in the beginning for digital twin. Now, over time, standards and interoperability develops, so you can now have a data model and you can implement it on an Oracle database, and it's fairly easy to move it to IBM database. So we're not there yet in the industry because right now the platform are still going to be very lock-in and proprietary. But you're definitely right. You need to keep that in mind. But again, if you keep this approach where you separate, okay, who provides the expertise and understand the assets, and make sure I capture that knowledge well, and now who consumes it? If you already do that, you're on the right track. And as platform evolves to manage both, you will have more freedom. So, but you definitely have a great point here. And there is going to be a battle, I believe, for digital twin platforms, the same way that we had a battle for relational database platforms.
Well, let's talk about what that means. So what's the nitty-gritty of actually creating one of these digital twins? Is it a modeling language? Is it a certain type? Are we just using our regular programming languages? Are we doing this on the analytics platforms? Talk about actually creating this, the model that we're talking about here, or the digital twin, however you want to approach it. How is it actually, how do people creating them?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit of all of the above. But at a high level, there's two fundamental aspects. There's the data aspect, which is, data and metadata, I would say, which is, how do I get access to the data? So how do I get, the asset model? And keep in mind that, there are machines, and actually most of industrial systems were not designed with digital twin in mind. They were either designed with an on-off switch and we added some sensor later, or they were designed with control system. But control system was there to control them. They were not there to understand the asset. So there's a lot of reverse engineering happening there. And we actually at GE have interesting machine learning techniques for that. But let's not digress. So there's the data. I need to be able to understand the structure of the asset, and I need to be able to get the sensor data and get the actuator data. And I probably need to be able to integrate that with other systems, because the service records are probably in an ERP system. The bill of material might be in an SAP database somewhere. So there's a whole aspect of data integration, and that's not new. It's just, a little more complicated because there are different sources, but you have to first, aggregate, federate all this data. Now, once you have the data, you have to persist it, and you have to persist it, dynamically and constantly, because sensors are generating data. So there you go into the whole edge to cloud, which data do I filter on the edge? Which one do I send to the cloud? Which one do I dedupe? So there's a whole data aspect. Now, I have the data in a place where I can start building intelligence. So building intelligence can be as simple as, just building simple KPIs, doing simple statistics, getting into algorithm, getting into data science, getting into machine learning. So that's the sort of the techniques. And we see people using all kind of languages, MATLAB, R, Python, C, whatever. So there's not, a language of choice for that. What is interesting to point out in the industrial world is that there is one more aspect which is very unique, is the physics aspect. So we use a lot of physics. And I give you an example. Let me ask you a simple question. How many sensors do you believe there are on the jet engine?
I know this is a trick question, but let's say 1,000.
Yeah, exactly. So most people will say a lot. And actually, you and I talked about there's only 16 or 19. And the reason for that is, an engine operates in very harsh conditions. You cannot put a temperature sensor in a combustion chamber. It will blow up in a millisecond. Now, because we understand material science, because we understand the thermodynamics, we can actually use physics to generate virtual sensors. So we take the raw data and we complement that by virtual sensor data, analyzing signals and extracting basically signal from noise. So there's a whole practice around that, which is very unique to industrial elements. So now once you have, those algorithms, those physics models, those machine learning, it's about combining that. And again, you combine that for a specific outcome. You said, there are 5 important parts. I want to understand how those parts were. So in order to understand that for that part, I'm going to use this machine learning algorithm, but I also need this data, and I need to correlate that with this service record. So that's the kind of the way you do it at a very high level.
Give us a little bit more, fill that in a little bit more, Dimitri.
So in which area? In the building of the analytics?
No. Once we have the analytics, now you're now saying relating it, taking that analytics and I think you were going in the direction of going at a higher level representation of it. Is that where you were kind of moving? Like once you figure out what the models are, and let's just be clear, what the models are simply just the algorithms, and we'll even take it even further down. Let's say it's just an equation that fits the data in a very good way, right? So so that, just to demystify things, that's all it really is. It's going to be an equation,
Okay.
and it fits the data in a way for your particular application of it. But I think you were going to go beyond, or were you going to go beyond that at a higher level, or is that kind of where it stops?
Yeah, the thing is actually what we try to do to make it really valuable for our customers is actually go a little bit the other way around. Mm-hmm. So we look at an asset and we say, okay, that asset, we need to know its current condition, which means parameter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we go figure out the data and the transformation we need to do. Second thing we say, there are 6 critical parts, because these are the ones that fail. For these 6 critical parts, I want early warnings. So now, what kind of part it is? What kind of material science apply? What kind of data do I have? What kind of data do I need? Or do I need to do, a transformation of the data to extract a signal, so noise? And once I have the signal, maybe I need to store the signal and learn from it in the operation. So the idea is that you look at the outcome, and then you have a whole set of tools, physics formula, math formula, machine learning, a whole bunch of algorithms. We have a catalog of 150 algorithms today, and we're adding some every day. So you have this sort of big toolbox. We actually put that on a workbench. And again, the expert of the asset is going to assemble those different pieces in order to deliver a specific outcome.
No, I like that, and I think that is the critical point here. Everyone is outcome, right, Dimitri? I mean, it's that if you look at it in isolation, okay, you can see how it works, but more what's important is looking at it in the context of the application, in the context of the use case, and how you define that is with the outcome. And I think that's a super important point. And also, I like the analogy for everyone listening right now. Dimitri made a very good one. I guess it's the way that Predix thinks about it. But there's a toolbox, and you've got a lot of different tools that you can apply to your data. They're on the workbench. And correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but you've got
that's right.
And you're choosing. And within these toolboxes, they're just different algorithms. And again, they can be, they're generally going to be some sort of an equation. And since we're collecting discrete data, it's going to be generally statistics based. Although you can put a higher level representation on that, like a physics based model, even let's say a biological one, an economic one. And then you just have all these toolboxes that are sitting on the workbench, and then you just try now. And like Dimitri's saying, you then need experts to be able to choose from this workbox or these toolboxes on the workbench to see which is the best one, which is the one that fits best. But you can talk a little bit about machine learning, because machine learning is kind of helping in this too, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's one of the different tools we have available. And the interesting thing about machine learning, and this is usually why we combine that with physics, is especially when you're looking at failure and you look at systems that don't fail, because jet engines don't fail very often, you need different type of machine learning to be able to learn from that. Mm-hmm. So you really need to understand the kind of signal that you will see earlier that will trigger something, and use machine learning to figure out a way to extract that and do prediction models. So there's a whole set of different techniques we use there. But I would say that again, the machine learning algorithm that everybody uses across the industry are fairly well defined today. There is some research being done, and we do have a group for that to create new ones. But most of the algorithm already exist. What is really important is what kind of feature, what kind of data you select and you use, and that's an asset expert element. Machine learning is fairly generic across the board. It's really just how you feed it and having the richness of the tool, and fundamentally as well is how do you know it's right? Mm-hmm. So there's one concept we haven't talked about, which is what we call gold data. So gold data is a set of data that we have accumulated, and we know that if you have all those different inputs or features, if you want, in an algorithm, this is the output you need to have. Because we've measured that, we've tested that, we know it has been working. So when you have those gold data, it really helps you validate the different models much more quickly. And that's a very intensive element research. So I would say that the differentiation on machine learning today is much more on the data sets that you have rather than the algorithms themselves.
Meaning yes, and just to be clear, using the machine learning on the data to derive an algorithm. Is that what you mean?
Well, the data actually is what in machine learning, the data is what creates the algorithm, if you want. But your data set, it's only as good as the data set is good.
Yeah, and I think you're also, in a sense, what you're doing is describing the differences between a data scientist and a data analyst, right? I mean, a data scientist will put together that workbench, will maybe pull together the right toolboxes on it, we'll make sure it's all working, but you need that analyst, and it's going to be a domain expert, like you said, in whatever area, avionics, manufacturing, a particular type of manufacturing, that's going to analyze it and be able to come up with these beautiful models, right?
Yeah. And again, I don't want to digress, but there's actually, you're pointing out there's a very big debate between data analysts and data scientists in the field right now. I actually think that over time, those two are going to merge, because you're going to need the people that really understand the data, the metadata centric, and the people that understand those, self-learning algorithm, and they will all merge in the end. So it's just a new way to program to some extent.
What's the debate?
Well, the debate is whether you take a pure data model aspect as opposed to, you feed the data into the neural network and it will figure out.
Oh, you're saying the debate is whether you need a data analyst at all and whether a data scientist can actually do it?
Well, you have data scientists that would say, well, machine learning is enough. I don't need anything else. And you have the other guys that, so you need both. That's my point.
Okay. All right. Now, we've come up with our digital twin. And just to be clear, it's just an algorithm to describe a certain thing. Now, do we use that inside of our jet engine at all, or is it strictly going to be for a past and future analytics exercise, or are we using it in the jet engine or in the product itself?
Yeah, so let me just be clear here. It's not just the algorithm. It's the data and the intelligence. So it's the whole digital representation. Right. Yeah, so very important. So, I mean, the use case is, again, I would say that it's the pairing between that software construct and the physical system. So you can imagine that you have systems that are designed upfront with one, because this is what we're doing for new machines. But for older ones, you might not have them, so you might have to build them. Right. So you might have to create that pairing afterwards. So it's still a very early stage. And you actually point out to a very important concept here, is we have to design our platform in such a way that we can accommodate existing systems, especially in the industry, because machines live for 40 years. So we're not going to say to our customers, hey, trash your big machine and buy a new one because it comes with digital twin. So there is this double aspect of, and you're probably going to have a lot of systems that have very rudimentary digital twin in the coming years, because they are existing system and we just don't have the drive or the need to digitalize them completely. So we will focus on one or two specific outcomes we want to have from those machines, and we'll spend the energy to create that outcome and make sure it's paired to that specific machine.
And this is referring to the goal data, right? If you have it or not. And was it goal or was it gold?
No, it's gold. Oh, sorry.
Okay,
that's
so gold. So GOLD. So that makes sense. Yeah. So gold data. Yeah. So if you have the gold data, you don't have the gold data, for example, for an older machine, is kind of what you're talking about. So you need to build that gold data, right?
Yeah, and there is, I do believe, from an ecosystem standpoint, there's a lot of opportunities for partners to look at those, and actually people that have expertise in those older machines, to look at them and maybe put a bunch of sensors and then use their knowledge to build those gold data sets.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. No, I agree. And, it kind of takes us, again, I think we can go in a lot of different directions with our conversation. But the whole method of data as, well, first of all, let's consider data as the new oil. I'm okay with that. We have to refine it and so forth. But there's now being syndicated data repositories where you can buy data. But that's okay. But if it's just a stream of data, we have to talk about this contextualization. And this is kind of where you're going with this gold data, in a sense, is that is really this opportunity that you're talking about, right? It's not just getting these streams of data, because you have to do something with it. And that's kind of, if you can create the gold data along with the algorithms and so forth that go with it, then you've got some real value that you could use in many different ways.
Yeah, you're touching on a very interesting point again, and it's actually, it's that, but it's also, what is also very important is the metadata aspect. Mm-hmm. So, and this is what we call the asset model again. Because if you look at, this is why I think we're going to see in the coming years a lot of changes in a lot of IoT platform, because the fundamentals of the mass market IoT platform has been, okay, I have a sensor, I connect the sensor, here's the connectivity, I get the data, I put it into a data lake or data ocean or whatever, and then go figure. So I sit in panels where I have a lot of people saying, oh, I have all these data stream, as you said, but how do I figure out what they mean? Mm-hmm. Well, because we don't have the context, and that context is the asset model. Where this data came from, on which part was it, why was it there? So I cannot stress more than that, but to me, because a lot of people think that the first entry point to the digital twin is the model because it's the outcome. It is not. It's the asset model. I want to understand what it is, because when I know what it is, I can build that intelligence and deliver an outcome. If I just have data streams, you can still figure out stuff with a heavy data science, but it's going to be much, much more complicated. So if you have that description and understanding of the system, if you have historical data set, gold data sets that you built from previous operation or previous system, then you're in a very good position to very quickly build digital twins. If you just start from data streams, much, much more difficult.
No, and you're bringing up a good point, and really you're bringing up the point of application protocol. And that is putting around the contextual data. You capture it at the same time, and you take it to that data lake, within that data stream. But I think the point you're making, and clarify if I'm not understanding it correctly, but you need to have this metadata, which really implies you need to have an application protocol, which really implies that the platform you're going to choose better support these application protocols, because you need that contextual data to be able to make this asset model. Now, are you is that the level that you're talking about, or are you going up a higher level than that too?
No, that's fundamentally it. That's fundamentally it. So there's the data aspect, there's the metadata aspect, which is very important, and then there's the analytics. But they're all connected. And if you don't do that very connected, remember what we did, in the 90s when we started. We had an invoicing system, then we had a billing system, then we had a customer service system, and they all had different definition of a customer. And by the way, if you look at the banking system, it's a master data problem. If you look at the banking systems today, for a bank, you're still an account. You're not a person. Right. Now, they do a great job at hiding that on their website. But when you call them, you realize that every time you want to talk about your account, they ask you to authenticate. So, and my point is that if we do those same mistakes in a IoT space, it's going to be much, much, much worse.
And it's far more complicated, like you said. I mean, you save. This is a key takeaway from this discussion here is the metadata aspect, and to capture it. And when designing your IoT product, just make sure that you're not just capturing that data, obviously, but you're capturing all the contextual information around it. All right, I want to just close things off with 3 quick questions. And try to just try to give us the high level. But what's the relationship? Just again to try to just pound home this concept of the digital twin, software-defined product, software construct. What's the relationship between the digital twin and the platform, the digital twin and analytics, and the digital twin and the application?
Yeah. So to put it very simple, regarding the platform is where the digital twin lives. Mm-hmm. This is why it's persisted, where it's run. Okay. Regarding the analytics is the brain of the digital twin. So it looks at the data and it produces outcomes. And finally, the application consumes the value of the digital twin, and ideally through an API.
Absolutely. No, I like that. So let's talk a little bit more about the platform, because I think this is an important point. It depends on how you define a platform, but if we're looking at it, let's say an AEP platform, and that's an application enablement environment platform, an application enablement platform, an AEP. There's more than just dumb plumbing, and I do make the point quite a bit that the platform is something you should choose at the end, because it's middleware and it's supposed to support everything that you've chosen from the value down, as opposed to you don't choose, in my view, you don't choose a platform and then build everything on top of it. You're going to go the other way. But I have to talk through the other side of my mouth, because we touched on this, and Dimitri, I think this is something I'd like you to expand on, is the platform, though, does play a pretty big role in bringing together the different digital twins to be able to deliver that outcome. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think the difficulty we have if you look at the current state of the market is we talked about application protocol earlier, is that there isn't really I would say, the standardized way to create and describe digital twins. So think about it this way. Right. Again, in the relational database days, we had SQL. SQL gives you a language to create tables, and then you had the language to create records, access records, select records. We don't have that today. So what that forces us to do at this point in time is to go to the next level. So we have to look at the data federation, we have to look at the analytic orchestration, we have to look at the machine learning and assemble all that. So there's a whole lot of work in the middle, which is still going to be to some extent quite proprietary for a little bit of time until we have defined those application protocol where you can start off disconnecting the intelligence of the twin from the nitty-gritty, little low-level software components. So, and it's the maturity of the market. So we're working on that with the Predix platform. Others are doing it. But the reality right now is that disconnecting your digital twin from the platform is difficult because there isn't anything established for that.
So you're saying this orchestration is happening on the platform. However, it's going to be happening in a proprietary way, at least now. And so at a minimum, we do what we said earlier is separate and compartmentalize the digital twin on its own, but realize that the second level, this meta, the one level up, this higher level construct is still going to be something that's in the platform. So I think this is, the point I'm trying to make. I mean, that's an important point that I wanted, to be communicated was this is still not, completely portable. But the other point I want to make is you need to have this functionality. If you're choosing a platform, you need it. So when you're choosing a platform, whatever that platform may be, there has to be this idea of taking these digital, first of all, being able to create the digital twins and then having the concept of a digital twin that's not buried like we were talking about earlier within the rest of the middleware, being able to separate it, and then the second part, being able to take these discrete digital twins and being able to orchestrate them. So proprietary or not, you need this functionality, at least in my point of view. And so the point I'm trying to make here is I always do call the platform, dumb plumbing. However, right now, because of this, as Dimitri has been explaining, because of where we are in the evolution, there's a really smart part of this plumbing too. It may be proprietary, but it's what brings together these digital twins. Any more color to add to that?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think we said earlier the fundamental concept is bundling data and intelligence that give you those outcomes of the system. And below that, there's a lot of plumbing. Now, one closing statement on that is there is going to be an emergence of a standard at some point. At least this is my belief, because I do believe that, and the argument for that is that asset manufacturers or equipment manufacturers over time that are not shipping their product with a digital twin out of the box will disappear because they will not be able to participate easily in a digital world. So that's the major argument for that. So that will force that you buy a machine, a non-GE machine, and you will have to be able to plug it, drag and drop into Predix. Otherwise, you're not going to be in business because anybody that uses another asset and wants to do something digital with it won't be able to use yours.
Dimitri, that was great. Can you tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and your company?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're in the digital connected world, so I encourage everybody to go on g.com and look at G Digital. So we have a section on the broader G, which is called G Digital, and this is where you can find a lot of information about the Predix platform, digital twin, and there's a lot of stuff over there. I personally post most of my work on LinkedIn, as well as personal opinion on that. And if you want the fun part, I actually have a Pinterest board. Where I actually pin. I'm pinning every article I get from my Google Alerts. So if you go on Pinterest and type digital twin, you will find there's just me. There's only one crazy person doing that on Pinterest. So, but I have about 65 pins right now. So there's a lot of information over there, and a good third of them are GE. So we're still pretty much leading the sort there.
Great. And for everybody, we will put all the links of all the above in the show analysis notes. All right, Dimitri, great conversation. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce, for having me. I loved it. And definitely have a great day and let's talk soon.
Okay. Well, that was episode 84. A pretty good number. 2s and a 3 and a 7. To get an analysis of this episode, the links, and plus a transcript of the show, go to the show analysis notes. That is a page that's dedicated on IoTinc.com to each podcast. And you'll find this one if you just go there and search for it. They can all be found at www.iotinc.com/podcast. And remember, there's that hyphen between the IoT and the Inc. If you've been enjoying the podcast, subscribe. That way you'll get every episode delivered right to you. And there are 4 ways you can support the show. You can refer to it in your blog. You can share it on social. That would be really nice. There's sharing mechanisms on the show analysis notes. You can leave a review on iTunes. Kind of stalled there for a little bit, so it'd be nice to get those going. I'm going for that 100 mark. It only takes 1 click and a little bit longer if you want to write your thoughts. And you can leave a donation via PayPal. Yeah, still there. Really haven't had the time to deal with it. But I do have a big shout out for Building Brains Inc. and an even bigger one to Christian Vidloshare. Thank you very much. Plus, if you have any thoughts on the show, I'd love to hear from you. I can be reached at bruce@iotinc.com. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Until next time, may your path to IoT business be a cloned one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.